Hello YouTube friends, Ben.o.cichlid here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today I want to speak with you about acrylic versus glass. And when I first got started, glass was really the only type of tank I would consider, primarily because of cost. Acrylic is usually significantly, sometimes 3, 4, 5 times the cost of a comparable sized glass tank. And so that kept me out of acrylic tanks for quite some time. When I finally did take the plunge and picked up my first acrylic, which is the 100 gallon that you see here, I'll put a picture up here for you. That tank actually kind of stunned me on for a couple of reasons. One, the clarity of the tank. I mean, it seemed like the fish were much crisper, much sharper in their appearance. And also what surprised me was how light it was. And both that 100 and the 150 behind me here, my wife and I were able to actually, and granted it was when the tank was empty, of course, my wife and I were actually able to slide it into position. I mean, once I had it set up and the equipment was underneath, we were able to slide it into position. We couldn't do that with the 135 glass tank that used to be behind me here. The 135 glass tank, I needed another male, another individual who could help me, and maybe even a third one to move it around even while empty, because it was so heavy. When I finally sold it, four people came by and picked it up. So if I had to list the advantages of an acrylic tank, I would say clarity. They are actually less opaque or more see-through than glass. And second would be weight. They weigh significantly less than a comparable sized glass tank. What would be the disadvantages of an acrylic tank? You would have to take into account cost, and also a thing that can happen to acrylic tanks as they age is a thing called grazing, which you can see here. And this is just things that form in the seams of an acrylic tank. Apparently they're not necessarily dangerous. I've never heard of an acrylic tank bursting or coming apart, delaminating, if you will, but it is less aesthetic when you get this grazing. Now, when you compare that to the number of stories you hear of glass tanks that have had the the seal, the actual where the glass comes together actually fail. I mean, I know several people, several fish keepers and friends have had that happen, and it's been a disaster. You hear more of that with glass tanks than you certainly hear more failures with glass tanks than you do with acrylic. So if I was a brand new fish keeper starting over again, I would probably look for a used acrylic in good shape, not too scratched up, or get a real good deal on one that is really calcified and scratched up, because you can buff them out. You can buff them out. This one actually behind me, if you remember, the setup of this tank was in really bad shape. It was a salt tank, and it had a lot of mineral buildup, a lot of fogging, and I actually had a professional buff it out for me, and he did a pretty good job. So getting a used one, like in some place like Craigslist, maybe a local eBay seller or a local fish club, picking up a used one is a good deal. This entire setup behind me here, the stand, which was brand new, never used, the tank, and the full sump system underneath it, including the pump, I picked up for $400 on Craigslist. And that included a skimmer that I've never used and a second backup pump. So if you look around, if you decide what you want and keep your eyes out, have the cash ready, so that when you see a good deal, you can jump on it. You can find a pretty good deal on an acrylic tank. You don't have to worry too much about them leaking. They simply just, it's not really an issue so much with acrylic tanks. Certainly if you pick up an older glass tank, like I did with the 135 that I had previously, I had to reseal it. And I'll probably have to reseal the 60-gallon at some point. Once they get up over 10 years in age, you do want to reseal them, just as a precaution. So at any rate, that's my take on acrylic versus glass. I feel that acrylic is a superior material for aquariums because of the ability to see through it. And of course they have low iron or less reduced iron glass that is much more expensive than a regular glass tank, but you still have the weight factor, the tremendous weight, and which can probably overstress some floors, which was a concern of mine being in a leased house like I am. So at any rate, so I would put acrylic tanks at above glass tanks. Cost makes them prohibitive, but if you look around, you can get some good deals, and even if you have to buff it out a little bit, it's worth it. And do they scratch easier than glass? If you take the proper precautions and use the right kind of cleaning, no. They'll go a long time and not really show any real scratches and buffs, unless unless you're cleaning with something like a sponge or something like a mag float or something, and a piece of rock or coral or something gets caught in there, and you're using that to scrape you're going to scratch it. You'll probably scratch a glass tank as well if you do that. But I think acrylic probably will scratch more easily, but it can also be buffed out pretty easily. Glass can also be buffed out, but it's quite a project. So there you have it. That's my take on glass versus acrylic. And if you can get a hold of an acrylic tank with rounded corners in the front, I think those are the best looking acrylic tanks available. Please share your thoughts below. What are your thoughts about glass versus acrylic? Do you have a preference? Do you own both of them? Have you owned them both? What's been your experience with owning them? I'd love to hear it. And that's it for me now. So be sure to hit that bell, hit that and rate and share and comment and subscribe if you haven't already. Okay? As always, thank you so much for tuning in. You are very appreciated as always. Bye-bye.